so much for your time. And Kathleen is, of course, with the University of Cape Town. It's interesting that you've specifically decided to look at the issue of expectations. And generally, there are so much that South Africans have around commissions of inquiry. And ultimately, it comes to issues of accountability and genuinely wanting to see justice served. But why do you think that part of that expectation is perhaps simply unrealistic, especially for commissions of inquiry?
I think the unrealistic expectations come from not knowing what commissions of inquiry can and can't do. They seem to operate like courts, and we know that courts can find people guilty and send them to jail and make them pay money and all those sorts of things. So there's an expectation building up as all this very lurid evidence comes out in these two commissions in particular, that it's going to result in people being imprisoned or having to pay back money or those kinds of things. People need to understand that all a commission of inquiry can do is advise the person who set it up. The person who set it up, it's the president for both of the Nugent and the Zondo commissions. President doesn't even have to follow that advice. So legally speaking, commissions of inquiry are quite weak. They're strong in that they've got good evidence-gathering powers. They can force people to provide them with evidence. But they're weak because they themselves can't decide what happens on the basis of the facts they find. We need to know that so that we work with commissions of inquiry more differently.
But Kathleen, given the fact that so much money then is invested into these commissions of inquiry, how do we appropriate their value? Because added to what you've just said is also the issue where whatever information that comes out in a commission of inquiry can also be protected. So it can't necessarily all be used in a court of law.
Yes, there is some restriction on the evidence that is self-incriminating. So evidence that witnesses provide against themselves can't be used against those witnesses in court. So yes, there are some limits. On the other hand, that evidence could then be obtained by other means and presented by the prosecution in a criminal trial. So it's not as if the moment it comes up in a commission of inquiry, it can never be used again. It's simply the fact has to be established anew. The other reason why commissions of inquiry are good is if they are run publicly and transparently, and we get to learn the facts, and by we I mean the people of South Africa. I feel that with the Zondo Commission in particular, the real work of the Commission might be done before it ever gets to do its report, which is to inform South Africans, to have an educated, engaged public, and to make it actually politically too embarrassing for the President and other responsible people not to act on the information that comes out. Given
the nature then, the inquisitorial nature, as you've put it, of what commissions are supposed to do, we often see, I mean, the country's best legal minds that are brought in to lead evidence for different witnesses. So perhaps it's not surprising that automatically we think this is a full-on court process that is taking place here. But speak to us about this rationality review issue, which you say is part of the reason why commissions also then have to be so thorough in the evidence that is being gathered.
Well, I don't think the commissions need to be that thorough specifically to meet the rationality review. A rationality review is a review by a court of a decision made by a public body. It's a review of an exercise of public power, but it's a very light review. To pass a rationality review, all the wielder of power has to show is that the conduct was rationally connected to a legitimate government objective. It's very easy to prove that. It's very hard to disprove that. So I don't think the rationality review is the problem. I think the reason that the Zondo and the Nugent commissions in particular have to be so thorough and have to prove that they're being fair to all the implicated parties is because the allegations and the impropriety that comes out is so serious, and the measures that have to be taken on the facts that emerge are so severe. So by the time these commissions are over, we've had some really, really damning evidence. And on the basis of that evidence, measures have to be taken, like firing people, prosecuting them, and so on. And for that, not so much for a rationality review, a court doesn't need to worry about it, but the people of South Africa need to see the whole process as legitimate so they can support the severe measures that get taken.
And how important is that perception of legitimacy and the overall buy-in of the population to the work that a commission is conducting?
I think it's central. It's almost the main work of the commission, is to get all of South Africa onto one page, or almost all of South Africa onto one page about what actually happened. Because so far there's been so much misinformation. There's been misinformation in the press. There's been smearing of people who bring up allegations of state capture. It's become a political football. And the only way to fix that is to clarify the facts. And I think once we all know what actually happened, and once we can accept that those facts are real, because the process whereby they were uncovered was fair and therefore it's legitimate, then we can run with what gets done with those facts. But if not, we just keep playing the blame game.
And Kathleen, just quickly before I let you go, if you perhaps would weigh in on Judge Zondo's decision to bar just some of the information that has come out in the leaked affidavits that are before the commission. You know, and you've spoken about the importance of this commission. Is it strange? Are all these things that are happening strange?
I'm sorry, I missed your question. His decision to bar some information? Or
yes, in terms of the leaked affidavits, saying that the media should not, asking people to refrain from talking about the contents of the leaked affidavits.
That is the regulations that he set up to run the commission, and everybody's bound by them. And he's been scrupulous about making sure everybody sticks to the same rules. So the rules are, you can publicize and discuss the information, the evidence, once it's produced that in the commission, but not before. And I think that's to stop what I suppose we might call a trial by media. It comes out properly at the commission, and then everybody else can start engaging. So no, that's not odd. That doesn't surprise me, because it makes sure that the procedure remains within the confines of the Commission's process.
All right, so let's leave it there for tonight. I suppose it's like you said, it's all become somewhat of a political football at this stage, and many of the things that are happening then also play into those political machinations. The University of Cape Town's Kathleen Power